And that tends to be where burnout comes from, is forcing yourself to pretend to be someone you're not.
Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation.
This is going to be really fun because when we talked off air before, it was such a fun, weird experience. We both discovered our love for anime. We both discovered our love for cats.
It was instant friendship. We're good. We're golden now.
Yeah, it was just super silly. What also really got me intrigued about you is you talked about neurodivergence, and I think that this is something that is going to be a really interesting topic in regards to entrepreneurialism. So why don't we start there, and you can tell the people a little bit about what that word means, because that's kind of one of those big scary words that I don't think a lot of people, I personally had to Google it. So
yeah, absolutely. So it's funny because it's one of those if you know, you know sort of things. So neurodivergent is actually a term that was coined way back in the 80s. And it was really coined as a way for scientific journals and this one particular researcher to identify individuals who have brain structures, literal physical brain structures that mean that they're wired differently. They think differently. And the kind of colloquial use of neurodivergent has turned into ADHD. And that's it. That's where the list ends. Sometimes, if you get someone who's really kind of in the know, you get autism added in. What a lot of people don't realize is that particularly for individuals who are born as women, our brain structure leads to misdiagnosis of autism as ADHD a lot. But I digress. Anyway, the actual term neurodivergent is a massive umbrella term that covers ADHD and autism, but also things like bipolar, PTSD, schizophrenia, all things that aren't just, you're quirky, but are actual physical differences in your brain. And so your neurological makeup diverges from the norm, and so you get neurodivergent.
Wait, so does that mean that because I think a lot of people understand or associate PTSD with being trauma-based, so you don't have PTSD until you've experienced some sort of trauma that you then have post-traumatic symptoms from. So does that mean that there is a possibility at some point that your brain creates alternative pathways that can also have you be classified as neurodivergent?
There's been research that essentially proves that when you experience that level of trauma, your brain creates additional neural pathways that actually have you function differently. That's why traumatic brain injuries, the actual physical impact of the brain, traumatic brain injuries are covered under neurodivergence as well.
Interesting. How did you learn about all this stuff?
So, funny story. I'm actually a licensed marriage and family therapist that has transitioned into tech.
What? Oh, I need to know everything about this story. This sounds amazing.
So I'll give you the sort of short and sweet version. I've been a nerd my whole life. Half of my signature program is based on Lord of the Rings. I mean, we know this already. But I mean, come on, you need a Legolas by you, but you also need a Gimli. Come on, that's how you set up your business. But anyway, so I actually met my partner through playing World of Warcraft and got engaged and was so excited with planning my wedding that I completely forgot to take my GREs. And I was going to go into organizational psychology. And when I realized that I hadn't taken my GREs, I, in typical ADHD fashion, went, well, that sucks. Now what? And decided to go into the master's program in marriage and family therapy. But a couple years into that business, I realized that I really enjoyed technology and strategy and numbers, and I missed the research and the curiosity of discovering something new. And so I actually transitioned into the technology side of the healthcare agency that I worked at and advanced through the ranks into executive management and decided in my, all of my serial entrepreneurial side hustles, decided that I wanted to support specifically neurodivergent entrepreneurs in their strategy as well.
There's so much to unpack here. I want to know, what was your experience like as a marriage and family therapist?
Yeah, so well, a couple of interesting pieces. We started out our internships at the college uh, therapy center.
Mm.
And so I worked with a lot of couples who um, were really struggling but didn't have the means to go to a private therapist and things like that. And so you really saw a very diverse group of individuals who had very different problems, some of them based in their socioeconomic status, some of them based in their upbringing, some of them based in generational trauma.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that's also where I experienced the first death of a client
Oh my
and the
God.
trauma that that creates for a therapist and the burnout that that
Yeah.
can create. And in my career as a therapist, I was actually working as a substance abuse counselor specifically for girls under the age of 18 who had experienced sexual assault. So I picked the real winners in terms of areas that I focused on.
How did you
And
not
so
take that stuff home with you? I feel like it's so easy to just like carry so much of that.
it was very, very difficult. And actually, the experiences in my internship in college were probably what taught me that I couldn't take it home, particularly after we lost one of our clients. And that's when it really hit that, oh, this is real. Not that I
Mm.
didn't think that I was working with real people. Obviously, I cared very much about my clients. And, this client had left our facility for several months, so we weren't actively engaged with them, but it still hit very hard. And I
Yeah.
realized that this is something that I needed to decompress from. And that's actually where I started leaning into my father's entrepreneurial spirit and developing businesses on the side. It was, many, many years before I had my daughter. It was just me and my partner. And so there was this little gap of free time where I could dabble and play. And so focusing on something totally different. I'm a serial entrepreneur, so there's been a lot of different passion projects and, ADHD, shiny object syndrome, all those stereotypes, right? And so I utilized my businesses to some extent to decompress, but I was commuting. I will tell you that listening to business podcasts for an hour on the drive
Mhm.
home definitely is a good way to decompress.
Yeah. What were some of your favorite side hustles? Because I think this is like such an important thing for us to talk about because I know for myself, like I had a year where I was like technically unemployed, but I was like, that's when I started my blog and that's when the idea for the podcast came about. So like personally speaking, there's no way for me to just like really be idle. I mean, I can go on vacation and like enjoy a full week off if I really wanted to, like, but for me personally, I'm much more of like I need to take like a weekend every so often to just either like be fully away from my phone or like going to Disneyland for me is a really good way for me to like decompress.
Mm-hmm.
I get back into like the magic of life and it like helps me deal with reality a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But like I know personally, there's no way that I could be idle for just a year. And so I think for like a lot of other aspiring entrepreneurs, most of that time, if you have like a random gap year or a random gap 6 months between jobs, like you're thinking about doing something. So I'm curious to know what some of those ideas looked like for you. And maybe like, were any of them exceptionally like successful and you were like, oh, this works?
So interestingly enough, you know how all the gurus out there, they say lean into your passions, right?
Mm.
Except I made the drastic mistake that a lot of what I like to phrase as my multi-passionate friends, hi Kila, my multi-passionate
Did you
friends make the error of trying to turn their hobbies into jobs.
Mm.
And that's the error I made for many, many years. Is first I wanted to have my craft business, right? And I tried that and it worked, but craft businesses really take the joy out of crafting if you don't set them up correctly. And then, then I wanted to do private practice life coaching, but then I was like, how does this differ from my therapy? And how do I be really careful about the legalities there? But then it really burnt me out when I was doing therapy at work and therapy is the side hustle.
Yeah.
And then when I got pregnant, it was, oh, we're going to do a baby blog. And then I couldn't enjoy, my pregnancy. And so when I started the operational strategy concept, I realized that, I have to actually do the things that I know how to do in my corporate world. I mean, I can bring a corporation from, $12 million a year to $22 million a year, but I can't get a little craft business off the ground. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And I realized I wasn't building a business that worked with my brain. I was building a business that I thought, oh, I can just do more of the thing I enjoy without any setup, without any structure, without anything in place that actually works for the way my brain works. And so that's what I did differently this round is I said, nope, we're going to actually build a business. We're going to do it the way that we know how to do it. And we're going to do it in a way that works with our brain.
Yeah, this
and then
is such a good point. I feel like I've tried so many different things in the past, and like I, have published 2 books, and that was really fun and I loved it. Like the first book that I published, I did it because I wanted to get a job working for Disney, got the job working for Disney, thought that I wanted to be an Imagineer. That, didn't work out. And then I wrote another book just because I was like, oh, I've never done anything just for fun. So I wrote a poetry book and I was like, oh, maybe I want to be a full-time author, and then go all in on this. But I didn't understand the industry. I didn't understand how much effort it took to really market the book and put it out, and to continue to market it. And then I felt like such a failure because the book didn't, become a bestseller. And then I was having an existential crisis. And then I was like, okay, well now I should go work in tech. And then when I started this blog, even before that, my dream was oh, maybe I'll be an influencer or something. And posting outfit photos is work, you talk to any of those girls and it's work. But for me, the idea of having to get dressed every day, think consciously about every single outfit and how is it different? How does it work with the feed? That's just not for me. And then it wasn't truly until the podcast started that I thought about it as a business. And I think that because it's partially is what you had described as it's not just something that I do for fun. Yes, I absolutely would continue to do this for free if I never made a dime from the podcast. That's fine. But at the same time, there's something to be said about the timing of it, who I am now as a person. And there is an inherent desire, weirdly, for me to think about this in a completely different way than I've ever thought about any of my other quote unquote business ventures. And I would love for you to dive into the point that you said about how it works with your brain, because I think maybe that's what I'm missing in understanding why this time is different.
Yeah, so absolutely. One of the things that I like to use, because I'm a very visual person, I'm a huge reader, but I struggle with words sometimes, and I work out really well externally processing, but also when I have a visual in front of me. So I grew up in Louisiana, and we had hurricanes, right? And so a lot of the houses are built on stilts. And if you think about how most people build a business, they build it on stilts. They don't put a foundation in place. They start building the second and the third floor, and they have this gorgeous house, but it's sitting on stilts. And in a hurricane, that might work great because the water flows right through. But in a business, if you get a gust of wind that blows those sticks out of place, because usually they're not really nice, strong, sturdy sticks, they're little matchsticks, and that they break those sticks down, your whole business starts plopping down onto the ground. And so the pieces that people typically lose is the scaffolding that keeps their business afloat. It's putting in place the basics, like your project management system, like your SOPs, like recurring tasks, time management, but time management that actually works for the way your brain's wired, because everybody's going to tell you to do an Eisenhower matrix. And I'm sorry, but urgent and important doesn't compute for my brain. Everything is urgent and important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so an Eisenhower matrix is not going to work. You might need to do, so I'm a nerd, right? So I did a scoring system. And so it's how much of an impact is this going to have on my business? How much of an impact does it have on my revenue? How much of an impact does it have on my mental health? And there's a couple others, right? And I score it. And so based on how high the score, that's how I sort it. And guess what? Now I'm a nerd. I love numbers. So that works for me. But someone who's visual based might detest that concept. And so it's about determining, okay, what are those basics that we can put in place? But then the whole thing starts with understanding what kind of CEO do you want to be. Because guess what? You're an entrepreneur, but you're still a CEO.
Yeah.
You're a chief executive officer. You're the owner of your business, so you're a CEO. So you have to understand what's your talent. Where do those golden tasks lie? And so I made the joke earlier that my signature program is based on Lord of the Rings, right? And so it's literally called Build Your Fellowship. Because because you're building the people that are sitting around the table in Rivendell with you. Yeah. And you're sitting at the head of the table. You have to know what kind of supports you need. You have to know what kind of little hobbit you're going to be. And if that second breakfast is really super important, because if so, you need to have the people around you that are going to make that shit happen. And so we talk a lot about bringing technology onto the payroll. Tech, for me, tech isn't a bill. It's part of my payroll. My support system in terms of the team that I have. They're part of my payroll because they're the scaffolding that holds my business afloat. Yeah. But I had to know what kind of CEO I wanted to be. My clients have to know what kind of CEO they want to be, and we do a lot of that work together.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff to unpack from that, because I think first thing that you said that really caught my attention was about setting up systems in place to help you succeed. And this requires a lot of tinkering and a lot of trial and error and a lot of desire to make it happen. Like, I think this is the other thing about timing, right? Where you will have a lot of practice with previous business experience where you've tried something and it didn't work. And you're like, okay, why didn't this work? Like for me, for example, like my last book, Why Didn't I Become a Full-Time Author? And it's like, my creative process for that type of experience is very tied to like emotional situations that happen in my life, right? So like something happens, I write a shit ton about it, and then that's it. So like that's not sustainable for me to continue to like churn out books on a regular basis. Like it's not going to work.
Let's not have traumatic experiences constantly.
Yeah, like I can't, that's not how it's going to work for me. And so like trying to force it also isn't going to work. So it's like, okay, that's not going to work. And then when I started doing my blog, like that, creating systems around that to support that, like on a weekly calendar basis, is very easy for me. I love a to-do list. I love like a color-coded moment. So it's a lot easier for me to like break down goals that I have into like daily habits. And this is still something that I'm learning. I just had a call the other day with a friend of mine, and she helped me do this, where I was like, okay, here's where I want to be at the end of the year. How do I set quarterly goals to help me reach those every year? Like that was the disconnect for me. And then to implement that into my project management software that I use for the blog, that I also use for work, very easy, because now everything's in one place, and like that really works for me. But I wouldn't have gotten to that point if it wasn't for a bunch of trial and erroring, like a million different planners, a million different ways of like doing project management. And like it also helps, like I was a project manager before, so like I kind of know how these systems work. But without that, like it's not going to make any sense. And the other thing that I love too is knowing what kind of CEO you want to be, because you start out as a founder, which means you start out as everything. You start out in the hustle mindset when you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to build this house. And you're like, I've got 2 popsicle sticks that are in place, and now I'm building like floors. And you're like, I still don't know what I'm doing. But essentially at one point you have to transition to the CEO, where you're like, okay, now I have to start delegating tasks. I have to start thinking about the things that only I can do, which like if we want to use the podcast as an example, like interviews are only something that I can do. And like a lot of content that has my face in it is only something that I can do. And so like a lot of those other tasks have to be delegated out. But I would love to also know, what are the exercises that you go through with your clients to talk to them about how or what kind of CEO they want to be? Like, what questions are you asking them?
Well, first I want to make a very clear statement. You cannot bully yourself into a neurotypical solution any more than the kid from high school bullied you into being normal. And there's no way to force your brain to work like the next person over. Yeah. And so when you get to a point of saying, okay, I've been bullying myself, I've been forcing myself to follow this solution, there's a relief and a release from that. because that's truly what neurotypical entrepreneurs do. This too. This is not something exclusive to neurodivergent entrepreneurs, but really we bully ourselves constantly into trying to get something to work for us.
Yeah.
And once you release that, and that's the first thing I work with my clients on, is, okay, where have you been forcing yourself in your business? Because business is hard. There's no other way to think about it. Business is difficult. Raising a toddler is difficult. But raising my 2.5-year-old is easier when I lean into my strengths. When I lean into being communicative with her. When I lean into recognizing where her emotions are. Same as in my business, when I lean into looking at the numbers instead of making up stories for my brain. When I lean into having conversations with clients instead of trying to do a done for you thing. And so when we're looking at a strategy for a client, the first thing we do is, what's already easy in your business? And I don't mean easy like it it's just some little minute task, but easy in terms of, hey, I love posting Instagram stories. I hate posting on Instagram, but I can get a story out there. Okay, great. How can we capitalize on that? Why is that easy for you? What tickles your brain about that? Because neurodivergence, a lot of us have executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction causes difficulty with decision making and executing the actual tasks at hand. So if we can find something that gives us a dopamine hit, that gives us that little happy juice, that tickles our brain in the right way, and capitalize on it, and allow ourselves to go down that rabbit hole of some hyperfixation, because those things that everyone else in the world thinks are detrimental to us are actually our superpowers. Because if I can go down a rabbit hole, or rather, a hyperfixation, right, to be really clear about it, well, then I should record myself and divvy that out into social media content for the next week.
Yeah.
And so it's leaning into, that's the very first thing we do, is what is ease in your business, and how can we maximize and capitalize on that? And then once we've got those, then we look at all the other junk and we say, okay, what can tech handle for us? What can team handle for us? What do we need budget-wise to force ourselves to do? And how can we still do that in a way that feels really good for us, that doesn't burn us out? Because that's one of the top things that kills an entrepreneurial spirit, and that's burnout, right?
Totally.
But it's first and foremost, what creates ease and how can we do more of it?
Yeah. I also am so curious to know, how do you know if you're neurodivergent or like neurotypical?
I always like to say that self-diagnosis is valid, because if you're looking for accommodations at work, if you're looking for accommodations at school, if you believe your child is neurodivergent, those are places where you absolutely want to seek out a diagnosis, because there's very legal reasons to have a diagnosis and get those accommodations. But if you're just trying to figure out how to help your brain work better, self-diagnosis is so incredibly valid, because all it is telling you that you think differently. Yeah. And that's good. Yeah. And so once you realize, oh, wait, this feels really like me. Okay, self-diagnose as neurodivergent. You don't even have to know what flavor of neurodivergent you are. But if you recognize, I'm neurodivergent, right? Hey, my business is named Neurospicy. I get the cooking thing all the time. Oh my God. And so if you recognize that the neurodivergence is there, like the neurodivergence is strong with this one, then you know, okay, I got to build stuff that works with my brain. And you'd be surprised. So neurodivergent individuals are 3 times more likely to become entrepreneurs. So there's a significant likelihood that if you are an entrepreneur, you're potentially neurodivergent. Maybe just a touch, maybe you just got one sprinkle, but there's a likelihood that you think differently. And neurodivergent people are primed to think like entrepreneurs anyway, because we think differently. Yeah. And so absolutely, self-diagnosis 100% valid, because all it is helping you recognize, I think differently, and here's how I can accommodate that in my own business.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of those like TikToks running around where people are like, with ADHD, they'll like start, they're like walking around the house, they're starting a task, they're like supposed to be putting away laundry, but they go into the kitchen and they see that like something in the kitchen is weird. So they're going to stop and like fix the kitchen. And then like, they're like, oh, well, now I think of something else. And they're going to go over here and do that. And like, eventually they'll come back to the laundry. And I find myself doing random stuff like that all the time. And I'll catch myself and be like, oh, I didn't finish the task that I started, but I'll go back and do it. But at the same time, I feel like it lends itself, for me specifically, to be able to handle a shit ton at one time. Like, I am a multitasking queen, and it's why, like, in my previous job, I was a project manager, and I was writing a book, and I was getting my master's, like, all at the same time, and I could do it. I mean, it was terrible, and I'm never going to do that much again, because I totally, like, broke myself. It was way too much. But I could do it, and I could do it well. And it's like, I am hesitant to qualify it as potentially like ADHD or whatever, because there's like a negative connotation with that. Whereas I think what I enjoy about how you're explaining it and what you're saying is like, it's just simply different, and different is good because it allows you to like simply just differentiate yourself from everyone else around you. And to your point, it's a superpower in so many ways because there are things that only you can do. And as an entrepreneur, that is such an important thing to say, like, why are you the right founder or the right CEO for this business? Because a lot of the times, especially in tech, like, tech ideas are a dime a dozen. I talked to a girl a while ago who opened her own athletic wear company, and previously, like, she had an idea that sounded so similar to Pinterest. It's crazy. And in that way, it's like, why are you the right CEO? Especially later in the growth of a company, like, you could be at a point where you're going to get like kicked off your board, and it's like you weren't the right CEO for that company, and like somebody's going to come in and do a better job than you. And it's like, you just have to utilize your strengths and your skill set to the best of your ability. And I feel like this is just a general thing in life. Like, you should be doing what works best for you, because I feel like that's just your path. Like, that makes the most sense for you, what you're supposed to be doing during this lifetime.
I'd like to put that in the context of good girl syndrome. So I'm a mid-millennial, right? I'm 35. And so my generation in particular, but I know the generations on either side of me as well, have this concept of good girl syndrome. And it is non-gendered, just the phrasing has been gendered. But it's this concept of serve others at the cost of yourself.
Oh my God.
It's passed from our mothers, and we're trying very, very hard not to pass it to our children. But we don't want to go to the other extreme, which is serving yourself at the expense of others. But there is this beautiful middle ground of upholding your own values, of making choices and taking action that support you to allow you to support others. I mean, I've had a decade of experience as a corporate executive. If I tried to change myself to play the political game of corporate America, I would not only be miserable, but I wouldn't be able to serve my staff. I wouldn't be able to serve the clients that my agency serves, and I certainly wouldn't be able to serve my family in the way that I want to serve them. My whole life centers around making sure that my daughter grows up the best she can grow up, that I have a family around that I can take care of, that I'm taking care of my own needs so that I can serve them. And if I changed who I was or tried to mask, because that's the phrasing that's used a lot in neurodivergent spheres, is masking. So you're masking who you are, you're masking your tics, you're masking the way your brain works. If I put that mask on for my whole life, I would burn out. And that tends to be where burnout comes from, is forcing yourself to pretend to be someone you're not in the efforts of trying to please everyone around you. If you come back to center and recognize who you are and what your values are, and make sure that each choice in your business, each choice in your life aligns with those values and supports you at the same time, that's where you get some of that magic happening.
Yeah. I mean, you're blowing my mind a little bit, because I feel like for me, Like I've always been very high achieving because I had really high expectations. And it truly, like, the gap year that I took between jobs, obviously it wasn't by my own preference, but it's just what happened. And like, yeah, like I literally was trying to apply to jobs every day and like nothing was working. Eventually I was super over it because it was just like constant rejection. And it's what made me stop and realize that I was applying to all of these jobs because it was what I was supposed to be doing, as opposed to what I really wanted, which I didn't even know what I really wanted. And I didn't know what I wanted because I had spent so much time like making sure that everyone else around me was happy. And like, you know, from such a young age, it was like, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing this. Like my life was planned out for me, and nobody had ever really stopped to hear what I wanted. And it wasn't until like later as an adult that I realized that I was like, I don't even know what I want. Like I had spent so much time listening to what everybody else wanted for me that I had never understood what I wanted for myself. And then when you realize that, you're like, okay, great. Now what do I want to do? And it's hard to listen to yourself because I literally couldn't hear what I wanted for so long because I just put it away. Because like it, you know, it wanted to come out, but it was like, no, you have to listen to what everyone else wants because of their reasoning. You know, like for me, a lot it was because like, oh, I'm older, I know better, I've had more experience than you. You should do what I'm telling you. And I was like, well, I can't really argue with that. And I love talking to you about this also because I feel like the future of business has this really cerebral and internal aspect where it's like, in order for us to really do business and do business well, and I don't mean well in terms of like financial success, I think that that comes, but business as like, how do we become good leaders who are good to their staff, who are creating products that genuinely like come from a place of wanting to help people. And like that product could be a lotion. I don't care. But like if you come from a good place where you're like, I really want to help people, and you're like good to your staff because you've spent a lot of time understanding yourself, like to me, that's the future of business. To me, it's no longer like fully monetarily driven. It's really like, how can we do better as people?
It's consent-based business.
Oh my God. That's my new favorite thing.
But think about it. It's consent-based business. It's enthusiastic consent from your team, from your clients, from your audience, from your collaborators. Enthusiastic consent from the people you integrate with in your daily business life is going to garner enthusiastic consent from yourself. And so if you lean into just loving everything you do, I mean, obviously we're not going to love everything about business, right? I hate social media. I can't post an Instagram for my life. But if you really say, I'm coming from a place that's truly me, then the people that are engaging with you are engaging with you enthusiastically and with full informed consent of the person you are.
Oh my
You're
God.
not doing sleazy marketing.
Yeah. No, I think like Taylor Swift is like the perfect example of this. Like it's about time that I talk about her on the podcast because like it's about time that this happened. But like you think about her, right? Even if like a man is listening to this episode right now and he's like, I don't know anything about Taylor Swift, I don't care. Like this is important. Simply because like everybody that has ever interacted with her has said the exact same thing about her. They have all been like, she is the most genuine human being. She is truly like a kind person. And like, bottom line, she's really fucking good at what she does. And that's who she portrays herself consistently throughout time. Like, no matter what has been thrown out at her, she has remained the same, even if she has come out somewhat satirically to be like, you know, oh, you think I'm a bad girl, like have the Reputation album. But at the same time, like she has always maintained who she is. And it's kind of like what you're saying, like emphatically for her whole life, she's been like, I am this girl. And I have continued to be her. I have grown because I'm an older woman now. But at the same time, like my values are still the same. the people who work with her are emphatically like, we fucking love her because she is who she is and she always has been. And her fans are also like, we fucking love her because she is who she always has been. And like anybody that interacts with her also has the nicest things to say about her. And it's like, she does business so well. She's really smart. Like anybody who's ever read an article about her knows that she's super intelligent. And it's like she and her family know how to run a damn business.
Yep. That's for damn sure. And all of it is done authentically. I mean, we hear authentic as a buzzword so much, but when do we actually talk about what authentic means? And it's about enthusiasm. It's about being who you are and not changing what you're about to try to do differently. You can absolutely build a business that works perfectly for your brain. You do not have to change how your brain works to build a business. You just have to think about it differently because your brain thinks about it differently. But that's a perfect example because guess what? The second she starts to shift, her fans are going to notice and she's going to respond appropriately. As she grows, her fans are going to notice, but they are going to be supportive of her. They are behind her 100%. Every time she shifts, every time she tries something new, they know it's not coming from a money grab. It's not coming from a F everything place. It's coming from a she as a human being is shifting and she's teaching all of us to shift along with her.
Yeah. I really like this because I think that like as I get older and as I mature more and as I start to understand what's really important in life, making decisions that like if we want to use the word feel authentic, but to me it's like feels true is the most important thing because and I think like there's often a misconception where if you have to be true to yourself, it also means you have to like emphatically say no to somebody and like create confrontation. And it's really not. It's simply about understanding yourself on a deep level, which requires work. Like for me, it was probably like 2 years of truly like hard work to really like dig deep, unpack all my nonsense, understand it, deal with it, move on from it. Like that's a long process and it's hard and it's very uncomfortable. But what's on the other side of that is honestly, sometimes to me, what feels like a superpower. Like I just understand myself so well that I now can make decisions that work with who I am because they feel natural. And it's like thinking about being on the other side of that when it's like, you know, when you're making a decision and you're doing something and it feels like hard and you're like, ugh, I have to like do this thing and it like feels hard. Whereas now looking back on the other side of it, I'm like, oh, I just did something that didn't really align with me and I ignored that and pressed forward anyway. And now I'm just dealing with the consequences of ignoring myself. Where if it's like, funnily enough, for some reason, the world works in the way where if you pick stuff that feels right to you, like the opportunities just like explode and it's always coming and it's flowing and it's happening. And it's like people think that you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do because that's what you're supposed to do. And it's supposed to be hard and like life is hard. Whereas it's like, actually, no, if you do stuff that feels right to you, life is wonderful. Life is easy. Like, and that's not to say that there won't be challenges because you don't have growth without challenges. And the whole purpose of life is to grow. But it's easy in that like it feels good. And it's like when you know that a challenge is coming, aka maybe like a chapter is closing for you, you're going to know when it's coming. Like you'll feel like it's closing. Opportunities will stop presenting itself to you in that chapter. And you're like, oh, okay, it's time to move forward. And like moving on is always hard. It's uncomfortable. But like what's on the other side of that is fantastic.
Exactly. And I always kind of have a foot in the space of woo and a foot in the space of science, right? And so I'm a witchy woo girl in terms of like I wish that I had a cottage in the woods and could like, you know, have my little mushroom houses.
That is how I see myself. I see myself as a woman living in the forest in a cottage, and I have a little candle that sits in the little candlestick, and I go out at night and I look at the stars with my cat and with my little candle, and like that's who I am, just like as a person.
We've clearly identified at this point that you and I are the same person. I would also accept a hobbit house, just to be clear, particularly if second breakfast is involved. But really what it comes down to, right, is that manifestation is proven by neuroscience. Intuition is proven by neuroscience. We just call them different things. The best magic is science, right? And science is the best magic. And it's all the same darn stuff. It's just how you employ it and what works for you. So you're talking about feeling right. And a lot of people are, might be sitting there going, oh, she's talking about that intuition thing, and I don't have a gut check like that. Okay, that's fine. But when does something feel like a pro-cons list would be an immediate pro? Right? When does it feel like you know that's the right decision because you've got a pattern in place that you're seeing? All of those things are the same exact neurological happening. It's just how you look at it so that you can tap into it.
Totally.
So my brain all tends to go to the logic, but I'll dabble in the woo when I can. But it's when you recognize that it's all the same thing, and when you decide to make decisions based on what feels right in the moment. Look, thinking about a decision for 10 minutes versus 10 hours is not going to change the outcome of the decision. It's not going to make the decision better. A lot of my clients, I have them set a timer. You get 15 minutes to make a decision. That's it. Unless there's true research that needs to be done. Like if you're comparing technology, fine. I'll give you a little bit of extra time. But in reality, you get 10 or 15 minutes to make a decision. Because for those of us with executive dysfunction, the decision-making shuts down. There's just too many options. And we can't tap into that gut check because we're so focused on the other stuff and the fear and the rejection sensitivity and the good girl syndrome and the gifted child syndrome and the trauma, and pick your flavor. Let's put them all in a pot and have soup, because it really is too much input.
Yeah.
And so you take away all that input, you set a timer for 15 minutes, and you just make a decision, because guess what? Whether it's the right decision or the wrong decision, you'll figure it out. And then you'll shift.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I call it like noise. My brain is like noisy. And if I can't find a way to get rid of the noise, I can't make decisions. And I've come to learn, because for me, you want to call it intuition, we can do that, because to me, it's my gut feeling. I just know. And it took me a long time to develop it because I had covered it with so much noise for so long. It was all of those things that you had just said that were constantly plaguing my abilities to make the best decisions for myself. And it took a long time for me to unpack that and to to quiet the noise, to get rid of it, to get it out of my head and onto paper, if that's what I needed to do in the moment. And now it's a lot easier for me to separate the noise. I can be oop, I'm reacting this way because of X, Y, and Z that happened, or because I'm still maybe not over this, or this is coming from that place, as opposed to now, I'm just able to hear myself much more clearly. And it took a long time to get there. And it is possible for people. So somebody listening right now is oh, she just is different. She has intuition or whatever. It's okay, yeah, but you also do. You have gut feelings, like you said, when a pro is a hot pro, an immediate pro, a fuck yes. And it just takes time to do that and develop that habit and ability quickly. Now I get it. Now it comes and I'm ooh, I know what to do. But it took me a long time to get there. It took work. I had to develop it because I had put it away for so long.
And the scaffolding you need in order to be able to free yourself from that noise is boundaries. One of the hardest things for us to put in place. Right? Like you said, you were so grouped together by all of the different inputs that you couldn't set a boundary. And it took a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to set a boundary, especially as a gifted kid, where a lot of entrepreneurs fall into, right? We were gifted kids when we were little, and then suddenly the world collapsed on top of us, and now we don't know how to be gifted anymore. No, it's because we're adults and we know that there's something wrong with letting our boundaries be trodden upon.
Totally.
And that our brain does not like that. Our brain doesn't like, I am an adult, but I'm allowing people to treat me as a child. And when you let your boundaries be stepped on, your brain is wait, something's wrong here. I don't get it. And that's where the lack of ease comes from. And so start setting those boundaries, and your brain is starting to be like, oh, okay, we feel a little bit more adult here. Now, adulting is hard. I would rather be on the couch. But, we're adulting here. Wait, this feels a little bit more normal. Wait, okay, this feels good. And then that's when you start to create that momentum of setting boundaries, serving yourself, and being in that state of flow and ease like you were talking about. And that's when that intuition voice is going to come forward.
Yeah, and it always blows my mind too that when you start setting boundaries, the people around you become incredibly clear to me. It immediately tells me who is really here for me in terms of like my best interest versus the people who are in my life who want me to do what they want me to do because they have their own ideas of me. And like those become two very clearly different people. And it's also wild because you start to, obviously you want to hang out with the people that are there for you with like your best interest. And then those other people like get mad at you. And it's like, that is a reflection of where they're at in life. And they're like uncomfortable by the fact that you are making good decisions for yourself, because I always find it to be so wild that so many people around you want you to stay back with them. Like they don't want you to go forward, because then it makes them be like, shit, like I should probably focus on myself and like improve myself.
Right. We tend to dislike the things that are most like ourselves. It's just like the stereotype that the bullies from school are the kids that were bullied themselves, right? And they reacted by bullying others. The same thing happens with our non-chosen family a lot of times, right? And that this applies to when you're coming out, if you're LGBTQIA. This applies to if you're trying to share your neurodivergent diagnosis. By the way, significant representation of neurodivergence in the LGBTQIA population. So there's like 2 coming outs there. Not to minimize the experience, but there's like a lot of stuff that happens when you share your neurodivergence with your family. Because for parents, I speak from some ancillary personal experience here. When your parents realize that you have this diagnosis that they missed for 3 decades of your life, that brings up feelings for them as well.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was getting tested for the gifted program in elementary school, like my parents love telling this story, and no shade to them whatsoever. They were wonderful parents, but they think of this story as a badge of honor. We walked into the psychiatrist's office or the testing psychologist's office, and I got a certain amount of time to complete each activity. And instead, I played until the last couple of minutes of each segment, and then I'd complete the task really quickly. And then she'd give me the next task, and I would play until I knew I had just enough time to complete the task, and then I'd complete it. Well, that was a red flag for my neurodivergent. My parents still see that as how gifted I was.
Yeah, like you were so smart that you could just like play until you had to solve the task. You didn't need all that time.
Exactly. So now, luckily, we came to terms with that much earlier than a lot of people in my generation who are being diagnosed just right now in their 30s, 40s, 50s, tends to be after their children are diagnosed, they themselves are diagnosed. But still, the point, yeah, see how that works? So it but there is sometimes a lot of guilt when you share with your family that you are neurodivergent, because how could they have not seen it? And sometimes you have to move towards your chosen family as opposed to your non-chosen family, as I like to say, because you have to stick with the people that are going to support you. It's the same with team members. Yeah. If we're going to shift gears towards business just a little bit, if you don't have team members that can work with you, or that you can work with, you're going to have the same thing. You have to shift. You want to surround yourself with people that are going to facilitate your growth, not people who are going to force you to match.
Yeah, I think that sums it up like perfectly. And with work specifically, as a founder and a CEO, you're in a perfect position to exercise your boundaries because you're in charge. You're not working for somebody else where like you have to work with your annoying coworker because you don't have any other choice. In these scenarios, like you can set up amazing advisors to support you on a regular basis, and you get to choose them, and you get to hire employees. And like, I know now in tech, and I'm sure you're familiar with this also, that like culture fit is a big deal nowadays, like more so than I think it ever has been. Where before you go to a corporate world and you're like, here's my resume, here's the school I went to, like, hire me. You know, it's not that way anymore. It's like, can you hang out with us at lunch? Like, can you sit with us at the lunch table and like have a good conversation and interact with us? And can I rely on you as a person and as like a teammate to help us out when like somebody else is slacking, or like, you know, when they're unable to complete a task? Like, are you going to be able to step in and help them? Like, honestly, I think it's even just becoming like, are you a good person? Like, are you a good teammate? Are you a good person to spend 8 hours a day with? I think a lot of the times, like COVID especially, brought to our attention just how much time people were spending at the office and working. And it's like, oh my God. I know that this is the case because my old coworker, who's actually one of my best friends in the entire world, like still is today, like just was at his wedding. We were friends before he started working with me, but we became best friends because we spent 8 hours a day together. And then like we ended up spending like weekends together too, because we just became like best friends. And when you think about it that way, like he was the person I spent the most time with, like more than, you know, my family, more than like anybody else. You probably want to hire people who are going to be kind of a homie. Like, I'm not saying become BFFs with all your coworkers. Like, that's just not going to happen. But like, you probably want to spend time with people that you actually like and enjoy hanging out with to some degree.
Exactly. And in your business, you have the most power. I was very fortunate in my corporate career that I built my team. I had a team of 5, and I hired every single one of them. So I was able to hire people that, like, I literally in the middle of an interview will joke about anime, and I will joke about Lord of the Rings, because that's who you're gonna get when I hire you. And so I can't be someone else when I'm interviewing you, because that's a disservice to you. I'm back to the enthusiastic consent piece, right?
Yeah.
And you want to do the same in your business. So whether it's joining with a coworker and making sure that not just are they a good human, but that they're just a genuine human. Because if they're a good person but are constantly trying to mask themselves, well, that's going to be really uncomfortable for you, because your brain's going to notice that. Totally. You may not consciously realize what's happening, but your brain's going to notice it, right? You're going to be like, something's off. And you're going to end up distrusting someone who's simply trying to fit in. And that's a disservice to them and you. But in your business, oh my goodness, create that team that's exactly who you want it to be.
Yeah.
Be open, because Legolas didn't like Gimli to begin with, but, you know, they became besties. But the point still stands that, like, if they're a fit, they're a fit.
Yeah.
And if you can get along with them and you can manage them and you can have that, even if it's a friendly rivalry and a camaraderie with, then you know that it's going to be something that can turn into something great.
Yeah, I've never interviewed anybody, but I anticipate, like, I work for a very small tech company right now. We're very new. And I imagine that as we grow, like, I'll eventually have to interview somebody that we're going to bring on in some shape or form. And I've never interviewed anybody. And it makes me a little bit nervous thinking about interviewing somebody, because, like, I've been on the other side so many times, and I know sometimes, like, what it means to people to get hired. And I'm like, I don't know what to say. Just, I don't know.
Can I give you a little tip?
Yes, please.
Can I just drop a bomb on you?
Yeah, do it.
So hang on to the enthusiastic consent concept.
Yeah.
Okay. Let them know what you're going to do up front. Hey, so glad to have you here. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about me. You're going to talk a little bit about you. Where I'm going to ask you some questions, and then I'm going to wrap up by letting you know what the next steps are if I think you're a good fit. And if I don't think you're a good fit, I'm going to try to help you through that. You're done. That's it. You give them an agenda up front. They are now consenting to the agenda. And then you can just be you and just tell them a little bit about yourself. Do it like a podcast interview, in the sense of like, we're getting off great, so we know that we're going to be able to have a good chat. Same thing. And if you're relaxed, they're going to be relaxed.
Yeah. I think that's super helpful.
You're still going to be nervous.
Yeah. That actually really helps, especially because I think the scariest thing for me is if it's like, ooh, they're not a good fit. Like, what am I going to say? Because I don't like confrontation. It's very overwhelming for me to know that like it's coming, and then I just make this whole thing in my head, and then I just get nervous. Anyway, I have to consciously work on confrontation in moments like that. I think I just build it up because I'm afraid how they're going to react. But being like, if it's a great fit, we'll talk next steps. If it's not, we're going to work through it. It'll be fine. And that also helps me because, I do, pre-screening, quote unquote, for podcast interviews to make sure that like we can jive and it's going to be a sleigh, because that's what we're here for.
Clearly ours did not go well.
Obviously not. I've never had an experience yet where like one didn't go well, but I'm sure I will have one where like I'm going to interact with that person and I'm going to be like, listen, I don't think that this is going to work out. And I am now going to implement this every time I do my little 15-minute one-on-ones with people before I have them book a podcast interview, to be like, we're just going to chat. And if it doesn't work out, we'll talk about that. Because like now I am less uncomfortable by the idea. I feel like it's out in the open. Like the first initial step has been taken and I can, handle that conversation if and when it occurs.
And you're priming them that you're going to be honest with them, that you're not going to string them along. And look, there's always a different opportunity, right? Whether it's hiring or whether it's your podcast, because guess what? If someone's not a right fit for your podcast, you might know someone else that they are a great fit for.
Yeah.
And then it's just an immediate referral. Or you might say, you know what? I don't think you're a fit right now because I think I need you to hit this milestone, and I'd really love you to contact me back when you hit that. Or I really would love to talk about this. I want you to reach back out when you're there. And so there's always an opportunity. And whether it's whether it's even with a coworker, right? Same concept. There's always an opportunity to have a consent-based conversation and move forward. Like, just get the agenda out there and be done.
Yeah.
Because then everybody's a lot more understanding. But yeah, confrontation. I hate confrontation. I'm terrible with confrontation.
Yeah,
and
right.
So I just get the confrontation out of the way up front. But I'm horrible with it.
Yeah, no, I am the same way. It's like not my vibe. It makes me super nervous. But it like through practice, it gets easier and easier. Like I think setting boundaries for me was one of the ways that I like quote unquote addressed confrontation. A lot of the times nobody on the other side even knew that to me it was confrontation, for me just to be like, I don't want to hang out tonight. But it was to me.
Me all the way as well. 100%.
Yeah. Somebody's like, you want to like go grab dinner? And then for me to be like, I really don't want to, but I have to tell them. And it's like this whole thing, but really they don't know that this is happening. They're just asking. Yeah, I'm having like an internal crisis.
Exactly. Yeah, get the crisis out of the way. Just be like, here's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we don't get it. But that was really, really helpful advice. And I'm going to take that to heart. And I think that this is now like a great place to close because it just feels that way to me. I've just ruined the close.
Hey, hang on to the intuition.
Kelsey, thank you so much for joining me. It has been such a fun convo. And I think a lot of people are going to get something out of this one. I think it's a really interesting conversation and I appreciate your time.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Give Kilo a pet for me.